If you think you could never be vegan, you're in the right place. If you think there's something big you'd really like to do, but it's probably too late, you're in the right place. My name is Michelle Olander, and I think there has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. So I'm here every week to cheer you on and offer you actionable tips and strategies as you veg your best. Episode 144, Veganism and Masculinity with Rory Cockshaw. Happy June, kids. Happy June, my Veg Your Besties, my favorite month. I refer you back to my episode of last year, episode 94, Big Birthdays and Other Thoughts. That episode, if you want to know more about how my thoughts create my experience in the area of birthdays. But today is episode 144, and that means we have created a gross of episodes. A gross is 12 groups of 12, 144, but I legitimately do not know why I know that. Maybe it's because I've had a bit of a rocky time getting back into my normal work schedule after 2 trips to Europe this spring and catching up with all the normal things of work and life and homes and how we take care of it. So for those of you asking about my ribs that got squished in the train doors in Edinburgh, thank you for asking. I am much better, tender at times, but generally comfortable. Though I'm still not lifting weights or doing push-ups, and that will probably commence again soon, I hope. Speaking of astonishing athletes, our guest this week is a remarkable young man who describes himself as a professional vegan on his website. Rory Cockshaw came to my attention for his debate with British Member of Parliament Jacob Rees-Mogg on the subject of veganism. I then fell down the proverbial rabbit hole of Rory's YouTube channel, where you can learn all about his work as a vegan activist, his workouts, his ultra running, and his work as a plant-based nutritionist. A gifted writer, speaker, and graduate of Cambridge University, I think you're really going to love hearing Rory discuss his goals, the fly-free movement, and his thoughts about masculinity and eating meat. If you ever feel a bit pessimistic about how things are going, I think this conversation with Rory Cockshaw will remind you how many young people are living intentionally and working very hard for all our futures. You're in for a real treat, I think. Listen to Rory. I'll catch up with you on the other side. Rory Cockshaw, welcome to Veg Your Best.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really delighted to have you on. I'm glad to be able to introduce you to some of my listeners, some of whom I would say we're about close to 80% U.S. listeners for my podcast, but there's a whole component of Canadians and UK listeners and some stragglers in some other countries too. Yeah. So we need to define some terms. We will, because you came to my attention through your conversation that was recorded and went quite, I think, viral. I think that's the term, with Member of Parliament Jacob Rees-Mogg. So I want to find out how you got there. Why you were talking to Jacob Rees-Mogg about veganism. So give me a little background how that happened.
So I work currently as a full-time campaigner for one of the UK's leading vegan charity. You can probably tell by my tones and inflections that I am a Brit from across the pond. And so, yeah, I went, we essentially got a call in at work saying, hey, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I'll give some background on Jacob Rees-Mogg in a sec. Jacob Rees-Mogg would like to talk to one of our Viva campaigners on TV, and our PR manager turned to me and said, hey, Rory, do you want to do it? And I was like, yes, of course I want to do it. For people who aren't sure why I was so keen to go and talk to Jacob Rees-Mogg, he's a politician here in the UK, member of Parliament, as you said, and he's kind of referred to as the honourable member for the 18th century. He's the kind of person. He's also called the haunted Victorian pencil, which is my favourite description of him. He's quite tall, very slender, and is the kind of person who really presents himself as if he's from the 18th century. And he does this quite knowingly and explicitly. He will be walking around London in like a top hat, and it's literally like you've plucked him from a storybook that Charles Dickens would have written a while ago. So he's an interesting character, to say the least. He's also very, very well spoken. He's a very intelligent person, to be fair. And so I really wanted to go on because I knew that he was not somebody who was going to be supportive of veganism, and his audience as well is very much not the kind of audience you would expect to be amenable to a vegan like me coming on. So I got the train to Westminster from so where the UK government is based. Got the train to Westminster that day, that afternoon, and ended up in the evening on Jacob Rees-Mogg's talk show. And yeah, the rest is kind of history, I guess.
So not a lot of preparation time.
No, the one bit of preparation that I did do was I was given a heads up actually by somebody who said, by the way, Jacob Rees-Mogg once used this phrase, and the phrase is "tempora mutantur et nos mutamur in illis," and that means it's Latin, of course, and it means times change and we change with them. And this was Jacob Rees-Mogg's first ever tweet when he opened his Twitter account because he's such an 18th century gentleman. He wasn't on social media or anything, but when times changed and became more important, he opened his Twitter account on July 15th, 2017. Still remember it. And he posted this as his first tweet. And so I went on the TV show, and on the train there, I was reciting this Latin to myself to make sure I didn't forget it, to make sure I got it right. And then on the TV show, I opened with that. I quoted himself back to him, and said essentially the point was the climate is changing because this was all climate focused, surrounding veganism. The climate is changing. We need to change with it. We need to change our diets, become more plant based. And he really liked, to be fair, he really liked that I knew his first tweet and was talking to him in Latin. That kind of tickled his fancy, and the interview went pretty well from there.
I agree. I thought it was very disarming of you, and I do feel like he was fairly well behaved.
Yes, yeah, he was.
And
Yeah.
he didn't speak over you, and he let you, as far as I think I saw right to the end, he let you make your points. And
Exactly.
I'm going to put a link for the listeners to watch that or listen to that video, because I do think you make all your probably most of your most important arguments of why people should consider. And so let's talk about that. Why should people consider veganism? And especially, my listeners are typically women, and a lot of us have men in our lives who are offering some pushback, if that's corporate speak, about the concept of eating fewer animal products. What do you have to tell us about that as a young man and an active young man yourself?
So I would say that the essential argument for veganism is the same for anybody, male or female, wherever you're from in the world. And this essential argument is actually, for me, it kind of takes precedence over and above veganism itself. Veganism is kind of a result of this philosophy, and the philosophy is summarized in a very easy statement. And the statement is that we ought not cause unnecessary suffering to others. And this is the case anywhere, and it's not a controversial thing to say. And in fact, if you think about it, most people are going to agree that causing unnecessary suffering is generally wrong. So, for example, if you're walking down the street and there's a homeless person outside of a shop asking for money, you're not going to walk past and kick them because, well, one, they don't deserve to be kicked, of course, but two, you're just adding to their troubles. They're clearly a sentient being in need of help. You're not going to make things worse for them. And this is the case everywhere. You're not going to randomly stab somebody or randomly lock somebody in a cage just because you might like it, you might enjoy it. Because these are sentient beings that we do not want to harm, and causing unnecessary harm to them is simply wrong in every case. When we apply this to dogs and cats, people are still in our favour. When we say, "Oh, I'm not going to go and beat a dog today," people are like, "Well, great. Why would you?" But when we then apply it to other animals, to cows or pigs or whatever, you say, "Oh, I don't eat those animals because they are their own beings. They don't need to suffer, and they have their own rights to exist, just as we do. It's our planet; it's theirs too." Um, people are something like, oh wait, you're forcing your beliefs down my throat. You're taking away my right as a human to choose what I eat. I actually fundamentally believe that we all have a right to choose what we eat, but we do not have a right to choose whom we eat, and that's a very distinct difference for me. So when it comes to suddenly a sentient being, I don't refer to sentient beings as a what or an it or a that. It's a them, it's a whom. Um, you can say animals aren't people, perfectly fine. Maybe they're not people, but that doesn't mean that they are worth nothing. Even if animals are worth less than human beings are, then they're still worth more than a simple sandwich, a simple 15 minutes of sensory pleasure on your taste buds. So that's the ultimate argument. When it comes to men in particular, so this is the argument I give all sorts of people. There's environmental arguments, there's health arguments, there's everything, and they all kind of are subsumed under this idea of unnecessary suffering. But when it comes to men, men typically, especially young men, gym-going men, middle-aged men, um, these are a population of people who are far more susceptible to the idea that you need to eat meat to be healthy. So they're like, even if you're correct, perhaps that we shouldn't cause unnecessary suffering. Well, I believe that this suffering is necessary because I'm a hunter, or I go to the gym and I lift weights, or I'm descended from farmers, or I need to eat meat to get big and strong. And they're under all these false apprehensions, misapprehensions, that meat is a necessary and a natural thing. And even if they're not, so many men are just like, well, if I were to go vegan, I would be crucified by my friends for going vegan because it's perceived as a thing that is womanly or feminine to do. Because the demographics of the vegan movement are largely female, so if you look at any major organization, about 90% of their employees will be vegan, and I work for a vegan organization myself and can attest to that. Will be female, sorry, I think I said vegan. If you look at the vegan movement in general, about two-thirds of vegans are women. And if you look at veganuary signups, then 85% are women. So men are a very small minority in the vegan movement. We often have the loudest voices. So some of the biggest vegan activists are male. But quite often these are not men that kind of your ordinary kind of Joe blogs would look up to. They're very much like hippie types because we do have quite a hippie demographic. We're all kind of like free thinkers, and new age is a very big thing in veganism. I think we do need more role models of men who are middle-aged, go down the pub dads who are just ordinary guys who work in things like construction and manual labor and this kind of thing, very typically male roles, who other men look to and say, actually, he's vegan. This is not a thing that is exclusive to my demographic. This is something that I should join in on as well. It's about appealing to these masculine values, having like big blokes in the gym who smaller guys walk up to them and say, "Oh, how'd you get that big?" And they say, "Oh, well, I eat plant-based," because it is fundamentally just better for you as well, and that's a huge motivator for many men. So yeah, it's a big topic, the veganism masculinity thing, and it's not got a simple answer. Veganism itself is simple. How to make it appeal to others is not.
I think you're right about having more role models in that demographic. I know I have a family member who says that no elite team member is going to tell his teammates that he's not eating meat, because unless he's performing at 100%, they're going to tear him apart.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if that's true. I'm not a guy, and I don't follow elite sports, but I get the sense that a lot of people feel that way, that they would have to do it almost in secret if they were really not eating animal products. What do you think that makes sense from your point of view?
I think it does, yeah. So I rode for a few years. So before I'm now a runner, focused on like ultra endurance running. But I used to be a rower, and this was largely when I was at university. And so I was part of my kind of university, my college boat club, and I ended up becoming captain of that boat club. In my first year there, though, that's when I went vegan. So I started off there as a vegetarian, then went vegan. And I wasn't the best rower there. I was pretty good, so I was always in the first boat for the men's side. I was always like halfway down that boat. It was a boat of about 8 guys. Half of them would be better than me, half of them worse than me. I'd kind of sit comfortably in the middle. I was the only vegan. The rest were all meat eaters. And I ended up becoming captain, actually. And being captain, we'd then have, I'd organize like pre-race meals together. So the night before a big race, we'd all come around and we'd eat a meal together. And because I was captain, it would be at my house. And because I was the only vegan, I would cook vegan for everybody. But I wouldn't make a thing of it being vegan. I'd just like cook a spaghetti bolognese or something, like a giant spaghetti bolognese for 8 hungry rowers who eat a lot of food. And But I just make it vegan, and everybody just eat it and not really realize necessarily it was vegan because it tastes the same. Like it's pretty much the same stuff. Um, the cheese was a more contentious issue because they wanted to bring their own dairy cheese, and I wasn't really happy with them bringing dairy cheese into my house. And so I'd provide vegan cheese, and they'd kind of not want to touch it with a barge pole, kind of thing. But I think because I was the captain and I was the only vegan, they were far more willing to accept um, willing to accept the plant-based food. If I was like some lowly rower in the boat club that didn't really have any status or committee position or anything, and I was the only vegan, I probably wouldn't have been provided for. And in fact, my first and second years, the vegan provision that the other rowers would cook for me would just be like pasta and tomato sauce, like and some vegetables, and no protein content, no nothing. They were just like, well, we don't even know what vegans eat, so just have the tomato sauce on the pasta, and that's all we're going to give you. So yeah, that's part of the reason I think role modeling being a vegan is so important. And also there was the fact that my recovery speed was far, far better than any of theirs. And not only was I rowing and training about 10 times a week for rowing, I was also training for my first marathon, running 4 times a week for that. And I was lifting weights about 3 times a week as well. And also climbing once or twice a week. So I was training easily twice a day, and still had far better recovery than any of them did. And I think that influenced a few of them to be like, wow, Rory's diet is really, is not bad, at least.
So it's
Yeah.
important. It's important that you also had a carefully crafted diet. You were not simply foregoing animal products, I'm guessing, even though you were a
Yes.
young person who maybe wasn't really as up to speed on nutrition as you probably are now. I know you've done a lot of studies in that area, but you were including large amounts of protein.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I definitely wasn't as clued up on diet then as I am now. So as you said, I've now done a course to become, a course in plant-based nutrition specifically at the University of Winchester, which has been really good over the last kind of few months or so. And so now I'd say that I know a lot. Back then, I knew a bit, and I knew enough to get me by, and I was tracking my macro intake, which is not something I do anymore for various reasons. But at the time, I was tracking everything, and I was having like protein shakes to make sure I was getting all this, that, and the other, and trying to include all the microvitamins and supplements of various kinds in my diet. Not very scientifically, but as scientifically as I kind of knew how at the time, because I felt this pressure, and I think this is a thing that a lot of like vegan guys specifically do. You feel the pressure to be very fit and strong, and it's still a big motivator for me today to achieve to get high achievements in sports and athletics in general, is to prove to other people that you can be a vegan and be healthy at the same time, because this is still something a lot of people are completely head in the sand about. And the more I can explicitly be fitter, stronger, faster, better physically than they are, and be vegan, I can be like, well, why are you not on this side of the fence? Like, what is your actual reason for holding back on veganism? If I can prove in my own case that I can be far healthier than you are in every regard. In fact, there's a very funny story about this. I was running an ultramarathon in February, so it was a 70-kilometer race, just running the whole way from a little town in Wales down to Cardiff, the capital of Wales in the UK. And I was running this thing, and my dad was crewing me alongside, so he would drive between different stops to kind of find me and give me food and make sure I was okay and everything. And at one of these stops, I was changing my socks because I was about 45 kilometers into the 70-kilometer race. So I changed my socks, took my socks off, and my dad saw a few of my toenails had gone black. And this happens with endurance runners simply because almost no matter how well your shoes fit, just the constant like micro stresses will just basically kill off and bruise your toenails. And so my dad was posting about my race live on Facebook, and made some comment about how my toenails had gone black. And the comments underneath were immediately like, "Oh, Rory must be really unhealthy because he's a vegan. He's lacking B12, so his toenails have gone black and they're falling off." And it's like I'm literally like more than a marathon into this ultra marathon race, and you're telling me that I'm still unhealthy because my toenails have gone black, which is something that every endurance athlete gets. But I was running along and I saw those comments on my phone and I was just laughing at them because it's so absurd. You have to go to such lengths to prove to people you can actually be vegan because they're so unwilling to believe you that you're actually healthy.
Well, that means that's a lot of pressure on you to stay healthy and not injured, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
know I know as a very non-athletic woman of my own age, I every time I get a cold or anything, I feel like people are going, maybe if you just increased a little, maybe seafood, maybe some fish,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah.
And it's so I feel I get kind of like tense before I feel something coming on because I'm like, oh my God, now I'm all the days that I'm doing fine and looking great, nobody notices, but they notice when I have
Exactly. Yeah. It's confirmation bias.
absolutely confirmation bias is, and it's something that vegans themselves are not immune. That's part of the human condition, and so that's why I love when people will come on and really talk about what's hard, what's easy, because we want to understand the fullness of these decisions. Because veganism is simple, as you say, it's simply not causing harm whenever possible, but it's also done differently by everybody based on our lifestyles, where we live, who we live with, what access we have, what kinds of structural situations we find ourselves in. But I wanted to go back to Wales because I was watching the video of you. I don't know if it was this exact same run, but you were on Mount Snowdon, right?
Oh yeah, that was a different thing. That was a hiking trip a few months before. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you were talking, oh, really? Because I thought you said why you failed on your first ultra marathon. Are we on, am I
Oh
thinking of a
yeah,
different one?
that was a different ultra marathon then. Yeah. So
Okay. And
I've done a few, and one attempted which failed. That just turned into an ordinary marathon, and then a couple more after that. And this was on a hiking trip. I was in Snowdon in October, November, I think, and talking about the original attempt, I believe.
oh, I see. That's who you were doing. You were hiking and talking about the original tent. Because
Yes. Yeah.
because I'm a medievalist by training, and I was looking at the path you were on. I'm going, is that a Roman road? So you were on partially a Roman road on that trip,
Wow.
the Helen Road going up to
Yeah,
Wales.
it's near Llanberis, so I don't know the history of the area very well. But I believe it was definitely occupied by Romans at some point, and it's quite likely that path would be.
It had the classic Roman features of, and I was thinking,
Oh
so
wow,
it got my attention.
fascinating. Yeah.
I also love that you were dissecting what went wrong, which is because if you didn't, people would just think it's because you were vegan, obviously.
Yeah.
You talked about
Yeah.
preparation and all of these things. I think that's interesting that there is a little bit of pressure on you to be stronger, fitter, faster. And how does that feel sometimes? That must not always be fun.
Yeah, so at the moment, this last like month or so, and probably the next month as well, I am so prohibitively busy with life, the universe, and everything. In my professional life, my personal life, everything's changing. Yeah, I've not had as much time as I'd like to get like a regular training routine. So I do still train. I've been on a few long cycles, long runs, a few bodyweight sessions here and there. But I had to cancel my gym membership just because I wasn't using it. I just didn't have time to do so. And it does become stressful because I mean, I love exercise and fitness so much that not having that routine kind of does get to me. But there's also the fact that like if I do let myself slip, then I become kind of one of the unfit vegans, which obviously is perfectly within your rights to be. But because I'm trying to be at the I'm trying to get as many non-vegans to be like, oh yeah, maybe veganism is for me. I want to be as fit as possible, and perform to as high standards as possible. I think all of that pressure, to be honest, probably comes from myself. I feel like activists in particular do hold themselves to incredibly high standards, and this is what ultimately leads to burnout in the future. And it's something that I'm aware is on the horizon somewhere, possibly, and I don't want to come to. But particularly just being an activist, you just have such high standards and you just want yourself to be always at the forefront, always at the pinnacle, always doing your best. Because you do have this worldview where it's so much bigger than just you. Like there's so many billions, trillions of animals out there who are suffering every single year because people like us just breed them into existence and kill them and eat them and do horrible things to them in experiments and all sorts. Um, And so you get this idea that it's so much bigger than me, so it doesn't matter what I do to myself. I should flagellate myself as much as possible and put myself really through the grinder in order to be the best I can possibly be. Um, I feel like it is a very much internalized thing that so many activists deal with, and I definitely do, potentially even more than most. But yeah, but I do. That said, that sounds very negative. I do really enjoy my lifestyle. Like I know that if I were to get hit by a bus and die tomorrow, I know that I was squeezing everything I could out of life today. I know that I'm constantly trying my best to be my best, and that's the thing that really motivates me. I don't want to get a single day older than I currently am without being better than I was yesterday. At least that's something. And I think that's my driving kind of force at the moment. So it's a tough place to be in, but it's also a very rewarding one. And I know that I'm on the right side of history, which is important as well.
Yeah, well, that is very validating. And I think it is a beautiful thing. And it's also not required of all vegans.
Yes. Oh, totally. Yeah. It's definitely not required of all vegans.
Yeah. And I think sometimes I think sometimes people think, Michelle, I can't do what you're doing. I think most people look at you and say, Rory, I can't do what you're doing. But it doesn't mean that they can't make their own decisions to cause less harm and suffering, and it will help them. It will support them in many ways. And you're showing that you can really be very, very active, far more active than any normal person with a vegan diet. So you're not putting yourself in harm's way if you're thoughtful about the way you craft your nutrition. Now, that is something you're starting to offer people, right? You're starting to offer your advice to people about how they craft their nutrition and how they train. That's a newish part of it?
Yeah, so this is a new direction that I'm going in. So I said at the beginning of the podcast, I'm a full-time campaigner for a leading vegan charity here in the UK. And I'm actually leaving this charity kind of over the summer in order to go and build my own business. All very good terms and everything. It's a decision that I've weighed up a number of different factors and figured now is the time more than any other time to go and venture out on my own and try and do things that I've always wanted to do but never really had the equipment or the skill set. It actually started because in September I was out cycling and was hit by a car and thrown on my head, fractured my hand, and all this was perfectly fine, funnily enough, except for my fractured hand and a bit of a concussion and lots of bruises and scrapes everywhere. If I wasn't wearing my helmet, apparently I would have died, and that made me realise I could literally die at any point. And so that's why it's that factor back in the back of my head saying I could die tomorrow. I want to be as proud as I can be of today. And so that meant the insurance money I got through, because it wasn't my fault in the slightest. The insurance money I got through from the payout I then used and put straight into training to become a personal trainer and a nutritionist. So I finished the nutritionist course recently, and I'm nearly done with the personal trainer course as well. And this is going to give me a skill set and an expertise in particularly, I want to be helping vegan activists, vegans in general, but vegan activists are often so bad at, I guess, looking after themselves because we have this worldview where we're such a small cog in such a large wheel, trying to make all the change we can. I want to be offering my help and my support to people who are kind of maybe on the brink of burnout or vegan activists kind of pushing themselves as hard as they can to also look after themselves and also to do so for the animals, because the better you look after yourself, the better you're able to serve the animals, to serve the planet, and to serve each other. And so that's what I'm starting to do. I'm now actually the club nutritionist for Vegan Runners UK. So Vegan Runners is a UK-wide club with kind of factions, little punnets of vegans all over the country. It's a really, really lovely community, about 5,000 or so people. So I've recently taken on the role as being the nutritionist for the entire club, which is quite exciting and lots of exciting things planned there. Um, and yeah, so I'm currently in the process. The business isn't launched yet, but it will be launched in the next month or so.
Well, I think what you're saying is very important about vegan activists, because I run into this often, because some vegan activists are confronting this concept of veganism as a diet. They're like, it does not matter what you eat as long as it's not an animal product. And so they're coming from that mindset. So it is very much it can take on a cascade of actions because that's what they're thinking. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. I'm fighting for this. I'm trying to help this. This is important. And that's where I see people burning out very often is when, because that can be, I mean, the story is you can't, it's Diet Coke, French fries, and vegan donuts or something like that.
Yeah.
But this is so important that we also take good care of ourselves because that you're right. If we all burn out, if we all have, if we're all sick, we can't do anything for anybody.
Yeah, totally. And my kind of philosophy behind fitness is, again, it comes back to this idea that's kind of even superior to veganism itself, is just don't cause unnecessary suffering to sentient beings. Well, you yourself are one of the sentient beings that's kind of in your care. In fact, you are the being that is most in your care. Why are you not treating yourself like you'd want to treat, like you'd want somebody who loves you to treat you? Regardless of your own opinions of yourself and your self-worth. There's this thing, if you kind of take on a third person perspective, do for yourself what you'd want others to do for you. And that is not cramming Diet Coke and French fries down your throat and staying up till 3 a.m. scrolling through social media. It's taking care of yourself. It's making yourself go out and enjoy nature and be outside and go on a run or a cycle or even a walk. It's going to the gym regularly. It's eating healthily. It's understanding your body and what it needs, and it's taking rest days, and it's doing all these things that minimize your own suffering, because minimizing your own suffering is kind of the first step in fixing the world and minimizing the suffering in the world. So that's where the philosophy for me of behind fitness and health, from a very personal perspective, comes back to something that's even a precedent to veganism. It's simply minimize that unnecessary suffering.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. And I think we also want to be, well, maybe I think I want to be the vegan that somebody who's pre-vegan or not even thinking about vegan. I want to be that person that opens up people's ideas. And I think
Yeah.
I open up their ideas by having an active life, being a happy person, living in this world, doing my best to show that you lose nothing by being vegan. You really
Yeah.
lose nothing. And I think I know you've talked about how you were not vegan originally. I was not vegan until my mid 50s, and I thought I would lose. I thought that my family would lose options, my lifestyle would lose options, and so I feel like I need to be that person who shows we lose nothing by being more
Yeah.
compassionate on these topics.
Absolutely, and there is so much to gain. I think I said this to Jacob Rees-Mogg in that interview. Um, Before I went vegan, I would just eat the same like 5 different kinds of animals on rotation, grate some cheese on top of them, maybe have some pasta underneath them, but that was like all I'd do. A few veg, potatoes here and there. Now there's so many ingredients in my diet that I just never had before, never knew to enjoy. Chia seeds, you can do so much with chia seeds, and they're like one of the best things for you. And I didn't even know what a chia seed was. I don't think I'd ever heard of chia seeds before I went vegan. There's so many ingredients of foods and recipes and meals and cultures and cuisines out there. Nowadays, I cook, one of my favorite meals is a Gambian dish called a domoda, which is like a peanut butter stew. It's incredible, and nobody knows about anything about Gambian food. It's only something I discovered because I went vegan, and I was like, well, I want to like broaden my diet. I don't just want to have like the same old burgers and hot dogs and stuff on rotation. I want to have something exciting and new, and it's such a good excuse to learn all these amazing things. So now I'm a big proponent of a Gambian stew.
That's marvelous. I have heard about. I didn't know the name of it, but I know that peanut kind of
Yes, yeah,
vegetarian stuff. So, one of the things I know you've talked about recently is a little bit complicating for a lot of us who are just leaning into veganism, and it is the fly free
yes,
concept. And
yeah.
I know that some people are saying, Michelle, okay, you're taking away my burgers, you're taking away my cheese, and now I can't fly. So it's all a process and it's all a leaning in. But talk to me a little bit about why, as a vegan and why, as somebody who's a compassionate person, that you are encouraging people to limit the amount they're flying.
Yeah, so this is something, and actually, I remember my first thoughts about going flight free were 2 years ago in the summer of, I guess, 2021, I think. It was just after the pandemic, and obviously I hadn't flown anywhere for a few years because the pandemic was a thing. And I went on holiday then to Slovenia, I think. Yeah, it was Slovenia that year. So my mum and her side of the family kind of do a holiday each year, and I joined them. And went to Slovenia. On the plane back, I was already by this point I was a vegan, and I was increasingly concerned about the environment. And on the plane back, I wrote an article for my blog because I kept a blog which had quite a big readership back in the day. I wrote an article for the blog, and it was something like a farewell to flights or something. I can't remember what the title was, and I actually never published it because I was kind of in two minds. I had this really strong urge as an environmentalist to stop flying because I knew some of the data, not very much, but I knew enough to say this isn't really something I should be doing. Like I should be putting my care for the environment above my want to go on holiday via plane. That was just obvious to me. But at the same time, I just wasn't clued up enough, not educated or not empowered enough to actually make the jump and go fly free. So I never ended up publishing the article. Um, a year later, then I then did the same thing, still kind of in two minds about should I be flying, should I not be flying. This was actually just last summer, so about 11 months ago. I joined my family on a trip to Portugal for a week or two, and I was on the plane there again, thinking I shouldn't really be doing this. And actually, the kind of turning point in my life, the crux of this matter was I just started my job last year at this vegan charity, and the first thing I'd done was go away for about a week with the charity, traveling all over the country, giving out free vegan food and encouraging people. The aim of this campaign was to think about the environment. So I was telling people, hey, we should be, taking care of the environment, switch to plant-based lifestyle change, one of the best ways we can take care of the planet. And about a week later is when I then flew to Portugal and then flew back again from Spain as we traveled around a bit in Iberia. And I remember again, I got back into the country and I was like, that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good going and telling everybody else they should be taking care of the planet by, lifestyle change. And then I've just gone and hopped on a plane to the continent and then back again. And I looked into it, and it turns out that a trip from Heathrow in London to about Turkey also and back, um, that has about the equivalent emissions to how much carbon you save in an average year of going vegan versus being an omnivore. So if you are concerned about the planet and you go vegan, fantastic. That's one of the best things you can do for the environment. And in fact, it's not just about emissions, but it's land use and it's eutrophication, it's all these other stuff as well. Um, but in terms of the carbon emissions of going vegan, after 1 year, if you then go on a celebratory trip to Turkey, for example, and back again, well, now you're back where you were before. Like it's as if you never went vegan in the first place. And the more you fly and the further you fly, the more obviously this cancels out because it's so fossil fuel intensive. And that's literally just for one person in economy class. There are, of course, good reasons to fly. So, like seeing family, for example. I'm lucky I've not got family abroad. I guess you could say lucky. I'm not sure if that is lucky or not. But that means I'm not in a position where I need to like weigh up my environmental principles versus seeing my family. If it were for like healthcare or for love or whatever, it's kind of like I'm not in a position to judge other people for taking flights. I know in the US, for example, it's very difficult to get anywhere without either driving or flying because it's just such a big place, so spread out. In the UK, it's so easy to be flight free. Um, and so yeah, I looked into the data. I also um, just looked into people because ultimately people make other people change. And there's a really good charity called Flight Free UK, and they've got a pledge where you can say, "Hey, I'm not going to fly for this year because I care about the environment, so I don't want to damage it." And actually, there's a really positive message as well because there are so many beautiful places in the UK. There's, Snowdonia, that video of me climbing Snowdon. There's like the mountains of Scotland. There's Cornwall. I hiked around the end of Cornwall with my brother a few weeks ago. There's the Shropshire Hills, and there's the White Cliffs of Dover, and there's John O'Groats, and there's Land's End, and there's the Isles of Scilly and Orkney and Shetland and Ireland, the Wild Atlantic Way. There's so many beautiful places, and you don't need to fly to any of them. And you can still go to Europe. I'm actually going interrailing this summer, so I'm getting on a train and going around Europe, and the carbon emissions are like a couple of percent of what they would be if I were to do the same trip via flying. For me, again, this comes down not just to the practical implications of my choices, but to the underlying philosophy. And even as somebody who cares fundamentally about, I'm vegan because I care about animals. similarly, I only care about the environment because I care about the sentient beings that live in it, right? I'm not an environmentalist when it comes to Mars. Like, I don't care what happens in Mars's environment because the Martian environment is not home to trillions or quadrillions of sentient beings who will be harmed if the environment on Mars changes by a few degrees Celsius. I don't think anything would happen if Mars changed by a few degrees Celsius. I do care what happens here on Earth because fundamentally, the Earth is home to animals and to humans and to such an array of complex sentient life that by us simply going on holiday a few times a year or even once a year and emitting such great quantities of carbon, we are damaging those sentient beings. We are harming them and we are harming their chances of living a good life. Um, so that's why I became increasingly interested in the flight free movement. And actually, it's one of the easiest things you can do, especially if you're in the UK like me and you don't have any ties, familial wise or healthcare wise, to places abroad. It's pretty much the easiest thing you can do is just not fly to your next holiday. Choose a holiday location that's somewhere else. Um, so that's why I became so interested in the fly free movement. It essentially is, again, it's about minimizing the harm you cause, and it's also a super easy and super exciting and positive change to make, where you start to discover your own doorstep instead of somebody else's. Yeah.
Well, I think this is so interesting, and it is in keeping with what I noticed when I became vegan is we start to see other things that we never saw before. And they were there. It wasn't that they appeared, but they we start to see ourselves as having more agency than maybe we thought we had, having more options, being in charge of our lives just a little bit more than we thought. And it is also a very uncomfortable position, I think, for a lot of people, myself included. You talking about fly free is giving me agita. And I have actually a trip coming up in about 10 days to the UK. We will be taking trains all through. We're flying into Edinburgh, and then we're taking trains to Holy Isle, Lindisfarne, and
Yeah.
London. And so, yes, your country is probably a bit more suited to train travel than the US. We don't have
Oh, totally. Yeah.
most train, but that's not the point. The point is for us to keep thinking about where could we make a better choice, where could we make a more compassionate choice. And you talk about another issue that sometimes I think people find uncomfortable. And I've heard you explain it very beautifully, and I want to respect your time, but I think we have time for you to discuss it a little bit here. Many people say, listen, you don't get it. Meat is my culture. Animal products are my culture. Fishing is my culture. This is my culture. And you really have a nerve talking about what you're saying is disrespectful to my culture. And I know you've spoken a little bit about that. Is that something you could give your perspective on here?
Yeah, totally. Just coming back for a very brief few seconds to the US and the flight situation there. The reason that people have to fly around the USA is because, I mean, there are really no very good long distance trains that are accessible to people because the aviation lobby was so powerful that they actually stopped the development of trains and railways across the country. So just an interesting trivia fact there. In terms of saying, yeah, meat is my culture and animal products are my culture, it is true, and it was true of me as well. And this was the reason that I ate meat and dairy and eggs and fish and all the rest of it up until I was 18, 19 years old, is because it was so deeply culturally ingrained. And it's an understandable thing, and it's a very powerful force in our lives. Even if we don't explicitly acknowledge culture as being the reason, fundamentally it is in most cases. But then there's other things that are cultural as well. So, for example, we hear this term lad culture all the time nowadays. Um, and lad culture is this kind of, you're young, you're a man, you're going into nightclubs and treating women in a particular way as kind of objects or pieces of meat rather than, ironically, pieces of meat, rather than as individuals, as beings unto themselves. Um, but lad culture is also a sort of culture. And if I were part of this and I were going out with the boys to a nightclub of an evening and I were harassing women and somebody turned around and said, "Hey, Rory, why are you doing this? Why are you acting in this way?" And I said, "Well, it's my culture. This is how I've been raised. This is what the people around me are doing. This is ordinary to me and to us." That wouldn't be taken as a good justification. It might be an excuse depending on how you look at it, because if I were really raised and this were the only option that were presented to me, and every role model I had in my life were doing this and acting in this way, you could kind of understand why I turned out the way I did. But it is not a moral justification for what I'm doing to other people and how I'm making other people feel. And I feel the same way about eating animals. I don't think eating animals makes you a bad person. And as an animal rights activist, that might be slightly strange coming out of my mouth more than anybody's. However, I do think that the cultural argument is so strong that good people are made to do bad things by simply the fact of everybody around them doing these things as well. So I don't think it's an excuse, or I don't think it's a justification. Sorry, I think it is an excuse. But once your eyes are open to the truth, it's no longer something that has any bearing, particularly on the morality of the situation. Now, of course, you do get more complicated situations where you're not talking about somebody who, I live in Bristol in England and I just go to Sainsbury's or Morrison's or Tesco or any one of the big supermarkets and just buy food there, or I go to like a local grocer maybe and get some fruit and veg. My life is incredibly easy. If you were to go to somewhere like Greenland, for example, the Inuit people there who are indigenous to Greenland, they don't have a supermarket over the road from them, and if they do, it's not as well stocked as the one that's across from me. And so people say, how are you? Actually, I had this after the Jacob Rees-Mogg interview. I had somebody commented under the video on GB News' channel, imagine telling African children to be picky about the food they eat. And I wasn't telling African children to be picky about the food they eat. I was telling Jacob Rees-Mogg, the honourable member for the 18th century, to consider eating a more ethical, sustainable diet. And people get this perception that we're going to places like Greenland or the depths of Africa to tell people to go vegan. And in fact, these people are just as morally aware as we are. And in fact, if you were to explain, we believe you ought to minimize the suffering you cause, they'd probably be like, yeah, fair enough. That makes sense. They're just as intelligent as we are. They're just as moral as we are. We don't differ in our moral or intellectual faculties. We differ in the circumstances available to us, and that's a really important thing. For pretty much anybody in the UK, it's pretty straightforward to go and put your hand in a different place. Of course, there are things like eating disorders and financial barriers, and there are some places where it's more difficult than other places. But in general, 99% of people in this country will not find it difficult to adopt a more sustainable, ethical diet in the long term. There are a few weeks where everybody finds it a bit like, oh, what can I have? And I need to check the ingredients and everything. But actually, it's pretty easy in the big picture of the whole universe. Places like Greenland, I haven't yet gone to activism in Greenland simply because it would be pointless. It would be flogging a dead horse, to use a turn of phrase that is not my own. So this is the cultural argument. It's one that makes sense to me. It's one I'm very sympathetic to. I don't think it's one that justifies eating animals. I think it's one that does excuse it in some circumstances. But that is a situation that I hope will change.
Yeah, there's an old story that American Thanksgiving, that a mom is teaching her daughter how to make the Thanksgiving turkey, and she says, "Okay, you cut off the wings and you cut off the legs," and the daughter says, "Why?" And she goes, "I don't know. My mom. That's how my mom did it. So
Yeah.
let's call Grandma." And Grandma goes, "Oh, you still do that? Because I didn't have a big enough pan. That's why I did it." So sometimes we are carrying forward things that actually are not culture. They're just habits. And sometimes, and if we want to, if you want to hold on to the cultural things a little bit longer, I'm all for that. I'm all for people leaning into the easy stuff first and the less controversial stuff first until you get some sense that, oh, it is actually possible. I can actually do this.
Totally.
Now, some people say no, it's automatic overnight. I think that's great when it happens, if people can make these changes overnight. I just don't always see that as being sustainable for people who've really been indoctrinated the way I was for many, many years, and most people that I know are.
Absolutely. Very well put.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you are doing your work. I want you to come back when you've got your business ready. Your website is already very beautiful and interesting, and you have links to many of your writings. You did a TEDx talk, right? That
Yes.
people can get the transcript of, and I bet you somehow we can get them a link to the TEDx. I know you don't have.
Yeah, so it's actually owned by TED, so I have no rights over the link, and it was about 2 years ago now, and they've not published it, so I have a feeling they're not going to,
Oh,
sadly
interesting.
enough. So yeah, so I've actually got no rights over the talk. I do have a number of other talks which are available on YouTube, which we can put a link to instead.
Yeah, I think that will be great. I think everybody would love to get to know you better, and your work is so well reasoned. You are, for all of us who don't want to have a debate with a member of parliament or anyone else, I appreciate that you do that. So I'm
Thank
thanking
you
you
very much.
personally.
Very
Thank you.
kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. Thank you for being on. And we're going to give everybody the links to how to find you and follow what you're up to.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Lovely chatting to you.
So what did you think of Rory? I so admire people who speak well. I really do. Last week we had Akiva Gersh, the vegan rabbi, a fabulous communicator, and now Rory Cockshaw. I want to encourage you to get right over to Rory's website, rorycockshaw.com, or his Instagram page, which I think you can just look for Rory Cockshaw, but it's, I think, Enroot Rory, or ENROOTRORY. Anyway, you can just find it with Rory Cockshaw to keep up with him, because he is in the middle of getting a lot of things off the ground right now. And when the dust settles, I want him right back here on Veg Your Best to get us all up to speed. But in the meantime, if you listen to Rory, if you found yourself inspired or in some admiration of his work, I challenge you to step up in the way only you can this week. Step up for something you believe in. At the very least, be an ally or a support for someone who is stepping up, someone who's speaking out. Not all of us are cut out for a public-facing role. And if you knew me most of my life, you would never have believed that I could or would be doing this every week. But all it takes is a thought to break you wide open. And my thought was, I don't want anyone to think that it's too late to go vegan, that it's too hard, or that it won't matter. It's not too late. It's not too hard. It does matter. And even starting in that direction will change the direction of your life. So that was my thought. And I'd love you to go follow Rory Cockshaw. Even following activists like Rory on Instagram or on his YouTube channel, it makes a difference. It is a step. Those people feel your support, your interest, and you get a little dose of inspiration. You get a little information when they update. Win-win. We'll have Rory's links in the episode notes. And I'm wondering this week, what might you be doing? Could you do a little more, fly a little less? Can you avoid some plastic? Can you clean up trash at a park or a beach? Will you vote with your dollars or with your energy for the things that you do believe in, for the world that you want to see? Will you make a stand for the kindness and the compassion you yourself would like to experience? I mean it. Every little bit matters. I believe that. Okay, kids, I'll see you next week, as always. And until then, veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.